Peter, I've been having sort of, usually in my noticing it's a little bit more strategic or planned. I mean, I just sort of let go and try and see this. But recently, sort of let go of letting go and just see what happens. What happens? It's interesting. And for instance, this morning I was driving down the hill in my car and I was looking at the bay, and it wasn't really visual, but I just sort of sensed, I don't know, maybe what you call a field, or just, you know, it was just, it was, I couldn't, there wasn't anything I saw. But on top of that, then I noticed what I was seeing and hearing. I mean, there was a bird, and I could hear the car motor, and so all my senses were really highly attuned. But it was really just, it was all integrated. It was all part. And that hasn't happened really before. So, you know, I just wonder, I mean, there was something behind it, I just don't know what was behind.
Yeah. Well, you know, I mean, noticing is essentially coming to notice the dimensionality of experience. That experience is the moreness of experience. So whatever experience is presenting, it's also simultaneously more. And it's more than that, and it's more than that, and it's more than that. It's just endlessly more.
Yeah.
And noticing is essentially tuning into that, which can be to any degree and can look like anything or nothing in particular. And for sure, you know, when you begin to settle into noticing, you discover that it's actually the natural condition. It's actually experience itself. And it's not something you need to do or something you can actually not do in reality. So when you're sort of ramping up to familiarity, with coming to appreciate the astoundingness of this presence, you know, it can seem like something I need to do it. I need to, you know, play with it. I need to bring your attention to bear on it, and which is quite appropriate. But again, eventually, it does become more and more spontaneous, more and more just a spontaneous unfoldment of itself, which it intrinsically is and always has been, but you come to appreciate that more and more effortlessly.
Yeah, there was that sense of, oh my gosh, it's always been here.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, it was, and there wasn't, but the thing is that, to me, there was nothing more. I mean, the patterns and everything, I mean, what I was seeing and sensing,
right,
that was, you know, but, you know, just sort of ordinary.
Sure.
But behind that, it was just, well, it was something, you know, that didn't seem like there could be anything more than that.
Yeah, I mean, I call that dimensionality.
Yeah.
There's no real word for it, or, you know, there's no language, there's no way to address it, there's no way to even find out what it is or pin it down. But, you know, it's intrinsic in the nature of what this is, of what experience is, that it has this open-ended quality, this bottomless, it's like, you know, you step into a room and there's no floor kind of thing, you know, just wide open, infinite space.
We were talking about the other day about no bottom, and that sort of resonated with this.
Yeah, sure. But experience is intrinsically like that. It already is like that. It has always been like that. It can't not be like that. And coming to notice and appreciate that is what unfoldment consists of. And again, once you're sort of in that chute, once you're plugged into that, once you sort of open the floodgates of that mode of being with your experience, it sort of takes over and becomes very spontaneous and just tends to mushroom on its own.
Because when you say space, I mean, it's not the conventional.
It's not literally
it's
space.
It's not the conventional idea of space or dimension, but is something like that,
Yeah.
but it's not.
We don't have language to address these things,
Yeah.
which is part of the difficulty in trying to work with it.
Because for a while, I was I would, I'm listening to you or other people here, they talk about their noticing. I was a little confused because so much of mine is not have anything to do with my real senses.
Right. Oh, yeah, absolutely. The senses are small.
And so we would be talking about, it's light and this, and so, but I was sort of converting that into, well, I don't see that. But now that I understand, I've had enough experience, I understand now where, where this is, residing or where it's coming from.
Yeah. And, again, because there is no way to really indicate it or describe it before the fact, you just have to stumble one way or the other onto direct experience, and once it becomes a part of your experience, then you'll get it. Oh, that's what all this has been talking about. That's what, is being addressed. It's a challenge. There's no way to clearly put it. There's no language that can address these things. So, I use sort of euphemism and poetry and, vague allusion and all kinds of stuff. But, none of that's very precise, and none of that really captures it. It more kind of is an invitation to stumble onto it somehow, at best.
Even so, coming, to these and talking with you and other people, it's not exactly right, but it somehow points.
Oh yeah, and there's a nonverbal component which is very valuable. When you're with people who are tuned into this to some degree, there's a sense of palpability of that conveys itself directly, and so it doesn't need to rely upon language. Although it's vague and nuanced, and you sort of have to. There's a learning curve in coming to appreciate that too.
Yeah. Well, Leif and I and Lily ate at Vic's, and we started talking about some of our experiences. And I'm sure if anyone had been sitting and listening to us, they would have just went, "Oh my God, call the cops," because we were talking in such very precise terms. I thought, But then I started listening to Lily and Leif, and it wasn't precise language, but it seemed like it was. Because I reckon we were communing. So.
Yeah, because again, when you're talking to someone that has a basis in the same experience, you can indicate it rather specifically without necessarily the words you're using conveying a whole lot to someone that doesn't know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
With the broad.
Yeah.
One of the things that all three of us seem to have noticed is that we're inherently more functional, or things just seem to go like this without having to put a lot of thought or action, into figuring out what to do.
Yeah.
And there is much more, from my point of view, a sense of things happening ahead of time, so that rather than me figuring out where I'm going, I actually just have to look ahead and go, oh.
Yeah. Sure, I think this is quite typical. This has been my experience. I call this astounding inherent functionality of this inherent intelligence or what have you. But there is this principle of the fact that this is doing itself with astounding precision and meaningfulness and integration of a very nonlinear and hyperdimensional variety. And when you begin to notice this becomes quite apparent, and since that is the way things happen, it's easy to notice that that's the way things happen, and then you participate in them that way, which is a much more direct and efficient and comprehensive, albeit non-linear way of being with the flow of events and functionality than the the normal human method of trying to figure things out and running scared and hedging your bets and having a plan A and a plan B and all those kinds of things.
Yes.
And, this stuff it's all about one thing. It's all about coming to sort of plug into or begin to appreciate what is present here. And once you do that, it begins to show you what it is, and it shows you how it works, it shows you where it works, it shows you all aspects of itself very directly. And as this progressively occurs, your life just moves into that mode. It moves away from the erroneous, misinterpreted, sort of human materialistic framework into the actuality of this astoundingly bizarre hyperdimensional flow, or whatever you want to call it, that this actually consists of.
I was watching a program on something, another astronomical program about deep space, where they were like actually showing you here you are and now you're going here,
oh,
and now
fabulous.
you're going here and now you're out there. And, they kept zooming out until we were
Wonderful.
it was on the Milky Way, that's what it was.
Yeah.
And the fact that the Milky Way is like this, and that we're all going into the black hole at some very slow pace. But I just kind of was able to kind of go in my experience into that far away place and see that in fact nothing's different there.
Mm-hmm.
That there is this thread of experience that is the same
Mm-hmm.
wherever I go.
Yes.
And that there always has been, and I feel like it's sort of like something that I knock up against all the time, that sameness. And I think a lot of my early life I actually avoided that because it was sort of like this way of dumbing everything down, that whenever I had that experience I would try to avoid that because it was the bottomless thing, the unknown, and the tangible, the non-tangible, and because it didn't fit anywhere else into my reality or my world experience. But I find that in having my current experience that I can go back and kind of reclaim certain experience that had that thread running through it. Not for any reason, but just because it's an interesting exploration, really.
Sure. And the way I put that is that this never departs from what it is, but it can, even though it can look like anything, so it can present as anything in this sort of endless, sort of a fractal unfoldment of its interface of what it seems to look like. But it's always itself. It never becomes anything else. So there is a profound sameness, which is the true basis for security, the true basis for what's a good word? Security will do for now. It's a little weaker than I had in mind. this is absolutely, inviolably resting in itself, supporting itself. It is what it is. It can never and will never depart from itself. Even and what it looks, and it's independent. That fact is independent of what it looks like. It's independent of what it presents as. It's independent of what experience looks like. That it can look like anything, but it still is only whatever, regardless of what it looks like. Independently, it is absolutely what it is. Yes, which is of course what you are. What this is. I mean, the whole thing is just the one fact. Is this is itself. This is what it is. And when you tune into that, it's a powerful, well, the powerful orientation, because you get, this is reality. This is the fact. This is the truth. This is being / non-being / whatever. But it is itself inviolably, inalienably.
And I sort of feel like a lot of my life, my searching has been about trying to either move toward that or away from that. And at this point, I feel like my parameters for any sort of action have completely changed, and I'm not quite sure how that looks, in terms of what to do. I'm not really troubled about that because it seems to be doing itself anyway. But
again, we discover
just the relationship, the relational experience is shifting around.
Yeah, we discover this has its own mode, which of course dominates, needless to say. And we just spontaneously move from clinging to our old modes of approaching things and approaching our identity and approaching, our relationships or all relationality, into letting it settle into this inherent mode of what it is, as it is, and that obviously dominates and prevails. And fortunately, it turns out to be a whole lot easier, and as you pointed out earlier, a lot more efficient and generally more fun. I mean, and it's liberating because all of a sudden there's nothing you have to do, because you discover it's doing everything, has been all along, and what a load off.
It's more like a change of perspective.
Yeah. Because the facts don't change. The facts are what they have always been. Nothing changes. It's a matter of finding the actual orientation, finding the actual perspective of what's actually happening here. And then all of a sudden everything fits in as it does, and it makes sense in its own hyperdimensional, nonsensical manner.
Peter, I've been listening to the retreat talks, radiant talks, and I find that I've gotten through the first 2 talks, and I learned a lot of new things about radiance, and there was some talk about holding things to be other than what they are.
Yes.
And so I don't see how, I mean, that's what we do, is we hold things to be other than the radiance.
Yes.
And we get engaged in that holding pattern.
Yes.
And so I don't see how we can do other than that, because that's just what the radiance does. Is it gets into this holding pattern and it gets engaged, and
Right.
and so it just seems like it's just an endless loop that's going on.
Well, you don't need to not hold things to be various ways. You merely need to see that the holding is inaccurate.
Right.
And then you're not caught in that loop, even as it may spontaneously be occurring. For example, you may have a spontaneous trains of thought going in your mind that are, spewing analytical, babble and narration and talking about this and thinking about that and blah 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 blah. And sort of simplistic spiritual theory is, I got to stop that. I got to stop this train of thought, and then I'll be in peace and in freedom and spontaneity. But of course, that's a lot of work. A and B, it's impossible. You can't actually stop it because the mind is spontaneously functions. But you can see that it's inaccurate. And once you see it's inaccurate, you don't need to stop it because it no longer has power. It no longer is seductive. It's just, you know that it's an approximation, and a very weak approximation of actuality, and so you're no longer seduced into its version of things as being final or accurate or true.
Yeah. I find myself seeing I see these. I notice these holding patterns now, and I just I speak to myself, and that's the radiance. It just happens to be that way, and that's the radiance. But I also, I kind of feel like a real crazy person because I just keep getting engaged in the holding pattern, and I come out of it. And
that's okay. That's
it's just like it's just
That's okay when that happens. Don't worry about it. Just when you find yourself getting caught up in versions of things, that's fine. Just when you notice that, let go of it to whatever extent you can, and go to the radiance. It's all about going to the radiance when you can.
Yeah.
And in the long run, the radiance trumps. The radiance dominates.
So the radiance.
If you can go to it, it's going to win, even if you keep feeling like you're going back and forth. That's not important.
Well, I think the radiance kind of comes and goes, the feeling of radiance, and so the best I can do most of the time is, I notice that there's no version that's better than any other version. It's just all radiance. But so it's not like I can go in and out of the radiance because I don't feel that I have a real feeling for the radiance all the time, but I do feel it sometimes. And I don't know.
Whatever you
I'm
have.
not familiar enough with that feeling of radiance to actually,
and it's not so much a feeling. Radiance is just a substantial presence of experience. And so anything that like when you're seeing something, the light that you're seeing is the radiance.
Yeah.
So the substantial presence of experience is the radiance. So it doesn't need to be transcendental. It doesn't need to be, special or choirs of angels or something. Just like, there's light present in consciousness. That's fine. Because it is transcendental intrinsically, and if you give it a little attention, you will notice that readily. But even if you don't give it attention, it still is the radiance, and it still is transcendent. So it doesn't need to be special.
Yeah.
So the trick is to notice that all the holdings, all the thoughts and interpretations and narrations are inaccurate approximations of patterns that are present in experience, and those patterns are made of radiance.
Mm-hmm.
So the radiance doesn't need to have a special quality. It's just if there's a pattern present, then that's a symptom of presence of radiance. That's simple, because that's the substance. Radiance is the only substance that there is.
Mm-hmm.
Radiance is the substance of experience. It's very simple. So if experience is happening, radiance is present.
Yeah.
So noticing that substance, then if you notice the substance, you notice how inaccurate your approximations of it are. Like, you see someone sitting there and you think a thought about them, and then you look at them and say, how completely does that thought about them capture this actual the dimension, the astounding dimensionality of this actual pattern with all its, bottomless, fathomless meaningfulness.
Yeah.
You know, it's laughable. And so you see that, and it's just, okay, yeah, so these approximations are there, and the mind's spitting them out, and that's all fine. And sometimes I go to them and you know, sort of get swept away, and that's fine. But this actuality of radiant presence is always the case, undeniably. Experience is present. It's that simple. Experience is present. That's all this, you know. It's not a mystical, you know, fantastical radiant presence is some, you know, angelic visitation or something. It's just a simple, substantial presence of experience itself, which turns out to be transcendental. It just happens to be that that's the case. Whether you see it and notice it or not doesn't really matter. Because it will reveal that itself because it has nothing else to reveal. If you go to it, that's what it will open to.
And so when we talk about letting go, it's just kind of letting go of all of those holding patterns and just, is that what you mean by letting go?
Well, letting go means a lot of things. In terms of, it means if you drop everything, if you really just drop everything, just say, fuck it, just let go. You know, experience doesn't stop, and so letting go tends to the non-essentials or the superficialities tend to fall away, but there's something that doesn't fall away, and that's the radiance. The radiance doesn't fall away when you let go of everything.
Right, that's right. Yeah.
And so that's the whole point about letting go. Letting go isn't even really important. It's just another trick. It's another way of playing with it to learn to discriminate. I mean, the fundamental problem is we don't know how to discriminate between actuality and our inaccurate interpretations of it. We think they're all of a kind. You know, we think that, you know what I'm seeing and what I'm thinking about what I'm seeing are all the same, are all equally accurate, equally true, equally objective. And we're unaware of the fact that there's an unbridgeable gap between actuality and fantasy. And so all of these kinds of tricks like letting go and all that sort of thing are ways of exploring that and discovering that gap, because you know, objectivity, actuality is that which does not go away when you let go of everything. It does not go away when, you know, when you're not thinking of it or interpreting it. Actuality doesn't change, doesn't go away. Fantasies do. Fantasies can come and go, but actuality does not. It's absolutely, it's objective. And so training yourself, or playing, let's say exploring this condition of the coexistence of actual objective actuality along with this, you know, cloud dimension, whatever, of essentially fantasy, of interpretations of ways of holding it to be, can be valuable.
It's a lively group.
This is a long conversation. could I ask you to say something a little more about when things go whoosh?
Which particular kind of whoosh are we referring to?
Well, particularly, Susan put your first introductory lecture of Reagan's lecture up, and I went to that, and you were talking about quite at length things not staying stable at all.
Yes.
You look at something and they go whoosh.
Yes.
Can you say anything that might trigger me to understand a little more of that?
Possibly.
Of what you're saying.
Sure. It's the simple and quite evident fact that experience is absolutely unstable. No experience has any degree of persistence whatsoever. We're used to thinking in terms of objects that we imagine exist in the world, in the objective world, which is somehow relatively stable and sitting there. And the fact that our experience of them is jumping around, we attribute to faults of or errors or jumpiness of our perceiving faculties of these objectively existing stable objects, so we tend to have in a sort of materialistic worldview, we tend to have a profound bias towards this objectively existing stability, and we tend to enormously downplay the actual very flighty nature of our perceptions. But of course, these objectively existing objects and objectively existing environment is just a hypothesis, because the only actual evidence is experience itself, and experience is intrinsically very flighty. It's very dynamic. You could say absolutely dynamic. The exercise we've talked about many, many times of looking at a blank wall, for 10 minutes or half an hour, you'll notice that it becomes, since itself it's quite evident that nothing grossly is moving if you're, sitting very still and the wall's sitting very still and the light's stable and all that. So on a sort of a gross, obvious level, I think nothing's really very dynamic, and yet you will notice that every single aspect of your experience is astoundingly dynamic. It'll be going like this, and your attention will be going like this, and the actual, what you're actually seeing will be coming in and out, and this is intrinsically the nature of what experience is. Experience is absolutely unstable, has absolutely no persistence, no quality or pattern persists for any finite time at all.
Is this related to the fact that everybody probably has experienced that you try to concentrate on something and you can't hold it?
Of course.
And subjectively, your mind wanders.
Of course.
wandering a part of the pushiness?
All of it, all of it. Mind wanders, attention wanders, perception, is unstable. Every aspect of, there's no aspect of the entire event of experiencing that's not like that. It's entirely unstable. It's entirely just. And any experiment you undertake, if you do it in an unbiased way, will reveal this.
I'm almost tempted to read what I wrote down to myself so you could follow my thought. I wrote, it's not an essay that's worth reading for its literary merit, but on impermanence. One of the things that's been a stumbling block for me is the idea that things have no duration or permanence. The way I've tried to understand it, or this, is to imagine that the chair, for instance, is flashing in and out of existence and being replaced again at a high frequency, like a movie panels in a movie, and the thing is stationary, and yet its frequency is so rapid that I don't see that. When I've heard of other Buddhist, say lower Buddhist ideas of the impermanence, it almost sounds like they're describing that kind of thing. But this seems cumbersome and abstract and not too convincing, I said to myself. Another way of seeing it is that, or another way of thinking of the impermanence is that the pattern of the chair remains as a steady state, but the individual pixels or sparkles that constitute it are noticeably impermanent. There's no way to fixate on a single sparkle or even to identify what or how it is, except to say that it was experienced, and then I say even the pattern, the outline of the chair, say a cartoon outline, there is no cartoon outline, there's a pattern. Although the pattern exists, it can't be captured either. It can't be defined or examined in any way, because it both exists and obviously does not exist at the same time. It is an abstraction, yet it is all that I know, and for so far as the chair is concerned, to the degree that it obscures the reality of the sparkles, which are all that we're seeing in the first place.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, that's a lot better.
Hmm?
That's a lot better. But in that example, what you're calling the sparkles is what is present. There is no chair.
Yeah, that's
There's
what I'm
just
saying.
sparkles, and the chair. Huh?
You see a pattern of the chair.
No, the pattern is an aggregate of sparkles.
Right.
There's
exactly.
no actual pattern there as
No.
as an additional entity above and beyond or alongside the sparkles.
Right.
The sparkles, let's say coincidentally, seem to be more or less chair-like in some way.
Right.
But that doesn't mean that there has to be an actual pattern or an actual chair that's actually there in any sense. It's just that the sparkles happen to be aligned that way. I mean, I address this curious fact by the principle that I call inherent intelligence. So there appears to be all of this astounding patterning when there's no patterns at all. All there is all these sparkles. And so coincidentally, the sparkles seem to present themselves as if there's all these patterns and entities and semi-coherent, functional systems and all these sorts of things, without anything like that actually existing per se. It's just that the sparkles seem to inherently present that way of their own nature because of this principle of this profound, this astounding intelligence that they inherently consist of.
And what I was noticing was, I could, for instance, if you said, I don't know what this thing is, but give me a piece of paper, I can draw it.
Sure.
So I've drawn the pattern, I've drawn the outline of the pattern of the thing. And that pattern is so absorbing that I no longer see the sparkles. When I
Right.
look at the chair, I just see the pattern. In other words, I'm living in a total abstraction.
Exactly so. And this is typically what people do when you shift over to a material bias. You take this abstracted world of objects and things that you hold to actually exist as entities, and you suppose that that's primary, and you have a strong bias towards experiencing your experience in those terms, and the fact of what's actually present, which is the sparkles, gets sort of downplayed or de-emphasized in importance as just sort of being what's filling in the outlines, or what's sort of giving it substance and texture and what have you. Whereas in actuality, these abstractions don't exist. They are interpretations that exist within intelligence. I mean, intelligence is really what causes all the problem. If there was no intelligence, then the fact that there's this infinite sparkles shining in infinity would not present any challenges, because who would give a shit? Okay. But the fact that there's intelligence, i.e., there seems to be this profoundly meaningful and intricately functional and involved patterns and sub-patterns and evolution of patterns seemingly interacting with other patterns and all this other stuff is what causes the bugaboo. Because then the perceiving intelligence gets distracted by all that, and if you get that all of that is just intrinsic in the sparkles, that the sparkles tend to present that way, problem is solved, because it's not actually, that level of system doesn't need to be addressed, because it's only apparent. It's not really actual. The only actual system is the sparkles themselves, which by their very nature present that way. I mean, think of it like a dream. The dream presents as if there's all sorts of patterns and systems and dilemmas and situations and all of that. And if you take it on that level, it can be very intricate and confusing and seemingly problematic, let's say, or whatever. But when you get that, no, the dream is just a presentation of sparkles, essentially, in consciousness, and there's nothing stringing them together. There's no actual world there. There's no actual substance there. There's just sparkles in dreaming consciousness. Then the fact that it seems to present as if it was all of these situations and functional systems and entities and all of this is just essentially a coincidence, and is of no importance. There's no implications there. There's no actual problems being presented that need to be addressed. It just looks as if there were. Because the only actual event is the sparkles. And inherent in the nature of the sparkles is they tend to present as if they were all these intricate fractalated patternings. But the patterns don't exist on the level of patterns. I mean, this is the whole mystery of karma. There seems to be karma because there seems to be all this intense patterning, which implies cause and effect, and systems that need to be sorted out, and all this entities and all these kinds of things. But that level of organization is just apparent. It's just an artifact. It's like a moire pattern. It's illusory. It doesn't actually exist. The only thing that actually exists is the sparkles, which are intrinsically disconnected from each other. They don't. There are no actual patterns. There seem to be patterns. They're virtual patterns.
Well, there's this color also. I mean, color seems.
Well, color is an aspect of pattern.
It's like a watercolor. You haven't drawn outlines around things, but you use watercolors to paint.
Right.
That seems to be more what's happening.
Yeah.
Because they seem to have color. But you mentioned the other day is a very mysterious characteristic of the whole thing too. What is color? But that color seems to indicate patterns.
Well, all apparent characteristics, experiential characteristics that present, are inherent in the nature of the radiance, that it presents that way. But again, these characteristics and presentations, even though they seem to form patternings and all of that, the patternings aren't. There's no actual level of organization that stops on that level. In other words, it's essentially coincidental. It's as if you took a handful of rocks and threw them in the air and they landed, and they all happened to land in a perfect circle. And you'd think, oh, there's a circle. There's rocks. No, the rocks, all there is rocks. They just happen to land in a circle. And why should that be? Who knows? Why shouldn't it be? You know, why does the radiance seem to generate this inconceivable intricacy of patternings? I mean, Jesus Christ! You know, the astounding patternings of world systems and life forms and bios. I mean, Jesus! You know, this it's stupefying level of patterning. That can't be an accident. Yeah. According to who? You know, why not? The sparkles just like randomly leap out, and who says they shouldn't just look like that? They just happen to look like that because it's their nature to do so, because they are pure intelligence. You can think of it as like a game or a caprice on their part that they dance with each other into these astounding apparent patterns. But the patterns have no coherence. There's no actual entities on the level of patterning. The only entity is the sparkles themselves. That's the only actual presence. It's like on a TV show. The only actual presence is the flashing pixels on the screen. There's no other presence. But there seems to be people, and they seem to be interacting, and they seem to be in environments, and there seem to be objects. All there is pixels. So it's a seeming, but you know, there's information encoded in the programming that's generating the pixels. Fine, information. What does that mean? You know, it's more pixels. It's more, you know, squiggles. It's sine waves or ones and zeros or whatever. And where is it coming from? The same place the sparkles come from. Just the inherent nature of this inconceivability.
The most dynamic part of our confused state is the stories we have. We have these very elaborate stories, and we really have a heroic odysseys, you know, and it's very engrossing.
Oh, absolutely.
It seems like that's an awful lot to back out of.
Well, yeah, but you don't need to back out of it. You don't need to deconstruct it. You can bypass it altogether by seeing the actuality, the actual context within which all these stories exist, and in that perspective, it becomes clear that the stories are stories, and the actuality is actual, and the stories in no way apply to the actuality, so they don't need to stop or even be disentangled from. They're just stories. So who cares? They actually have no body to them. They have no sting. You know, it's like sitting around and telling stories. You know, there's no implication. It's just a story. What story can you tell? Well, you can tell any story you want, but it's just a story. So who cares? There's no repercussion. And all of our interpretations of what we think is going on here is in that level, that order of actuality. Just story. And stories can happen because there is this astounding intelligence which can generate stories, can appreciate stories, can maintain stories as coherent, and can invest belief in stories as if they live them as if they were virtually true. You know, sort of willing suspension of disbelief, like when we go to a movie and we get all jerked around and excited by the plot that's going on, when all it is patterns of light on the screen. This can happen because the intelligence spontaneously can be with itself in all of these kinds of modes. But that's all that's happening, is this transcendental intelligence, which is nothing other than hyperdimensional sparkles, playing with itself, exploring itself in various virtual ways, without anything actual to be explored except the sparkles and the intelligence, which are, of course, are one and the same.
Is that the
What? Everyone knows this, right? It's common sense, isn't it?
I'll have a baker's dozen.
those sparkles are laughing over? Is that the fundamental reason, what they're talking about when they talk about snake and rope and all of that?
Yeah, exactly. All of that. All of
It's
that.
the snake and the rope
Yes.
business.
Interpretation versus actual presence.
Mm-hmm.
What is present is what is actually present is what we're calling here in this conversation the sparkles, and all interpretations are the snake.
Mm-hmm.
So the rope is the sparkles, and the snake is all these systems and life forms and entities and past and future and consequences and causality and interaction and stuckness and death and life and pain and suffering and success and failure and all these things, that's all the snake. And the rope is just...
Yeah, that's good. It's great.
It is good. You know, it's astounding that it happens to be that way. But it's discoverable that it's that way because it is that way. You know, look, again and again, look for yourself, and you'll see that this is what there is to be found. You know, I mean, not to reiterate too heavy-handedly, but probably the clearest and easiest way of exploring all this is just look at dreams. And all these mechanisms become really, really obvious.
Well, I don't relate to the dream of sparkles. I don't remember dreams that much.
Well, it's not important that whether or not it sparkles, but the sense in which a dream is an experiential event in which nothing is really actually there, and yet it's experienced as if there was all these various conditions and entities and circumstances actually there. That's the important dichotomy.
Right, I'm trying to make a real correspondence. So
I mean, it's a snake in the rope thing
See
again.
the light thing in the dream. I don't see the light, but I don't pay that much attention to dreams.
Yeah. Well, it's not important, but it's, you know, if...
Well, I mean, I understand the analogy, the metaphor. I have dreams to that extent.
Yeah. But that's sufficient because that's the important point. You know, the important point is not deconstructing the sparkles or anything like that because you can't. I mean, we're calling them sparkles as if they actually were.
Well, that's it.
Or as if there was actually even a them. And what we're calling sparkles can seem to present like that, but you go looking for them, trying to track them down, and you know,
That's what I'm trying to get right there.
you want to get to the ungettable?
You can't. There's no butterfly net for a sparkle. You cannot catch a sparkle.
No, can't catch it.
It'll appear and it'll wink in. And
They're
I don't even know where it came from.
Sparkles are what we're calling sparkles are absolutely transcendental. Absolutely. They are the divine. You can't catch them, you can't find them, you can't pin them down, you can't...
But you recognize them when they come.
Yeah, they're real. I mean, that's the thing. They're real and they're actual, but you cannot find them. You cannot pin them down, you cannot define them, you can't make sense of them.
And primarily because we don't see them, because we're involved with the form.
No, not because we don't see them, but because we misinterpret what we're seeing. We don't appreciate it.
Well, that's, yeah, I mean, in the sense that I'm looking at the chair as a chair, the thing that I can draw a picture of.
Yeah, but even that, when you're looking at a chair as a chair, every single aspect of that functioning is this inconceivable transcendental sparkles. Every aspect of it. There's no aspect of it that is mundane or that is dull or that is wrong even. It's all just complete magic. Every aspect of it, you know. I mean, not recognizing the transcendent is exactly as transcendent as the transcendence itself. So every aspect of that situation is already.
You can't miss that one.
Yeah. So, but you can. That's the thing. And missing it is the transcendence too.
That's transcendent.
So the whole thing. I mean, you know, it's the damnedest thing.
Either way.
It's the damnedest thing that, you know, this can manage to not recognize itself, even when it is completely obvious, completely transcendental, and even if it's not recognizing itself is completely transcendental, and is prime evidence of the transcendental itself. You know, I mean, it's dizzying. My current preferred terminology actually is radiance rather than sparkles. Because even though it can present as sparkles, radiance is a little more open-ended in terms of exactly what's implied by that.
Seems to be more of an energetic thing
Yeah.
rather than a visual.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, sparkles is visually biased. Radiance is a little more. But of course, again, any terminology is irrelevant because obviously the thing is itself, and is not the words that are used to refer to it.
Yeah, it's like what's around the sparkles of radiance. The whole thing is radiance.
Yeah.
Everything.
Yeah. I mean, it's all one thing. There's only one thing happening, and what that is cannot be said, but is completely nakedly revealed and completely accessible.
That revelation seems to me is an indication of not seeing the form, of not focusing on the actual forms, which is what we conventionally do.
Mm-hmm.
So the revelation or the seeing is seeing through the forms, or
Well, it's not. I would say not being biased towards forms and not having forms, however you're holding forms, to be a particularly heavily weighted mode of sort of access, of analysis, or characteristic that you're sort of looking at your experience in terms of.
but you can't actually do that. Can
You can't actually do which.
you can't really decide to not have a preference for form.
You don't need to. You can just see the context within which form exists, which of course is beyond form or is other than form. I mean, this is a wonderful the taking advantage. Of the persnickety, slippery nature of the radiance. You can take advantage of that fact too, by noticing that any way you approach it, it's simultaneously more and other than that, without needing to deconstruct or turn off or stop or even divert your attention from the erroneous, heavy-handed way you're doing it. You just notice the more and other, without even needing to extricate yourself from your clumsiness, and bang.
Well, the other thing is that, the reason why we have obsessed about form so much is because there is being this mistaken understanding that there is some revelation there. And when you see there's no revelation in form, then it begins to lose its stickiness.
Yeah, exactly so. And that becomes clear. That becomes self-evidently the case, self-verifiably the case when you notice the radiance itself and you notice that it is showing up. It implies forms without actually being limited to forms, and so forms are ghostly. They're hollow shells. There's nothing actually there. The actual substance that's there is beyond being forms or not.
So Peter, so then noticing, it keeps taking a different turn as I'm understanding it.
Yes.
So noticing is really noticing all the different energy events and the versions and the forms. Isn't that what noticing is?
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, and then because I don't feel that I'm noticing actuality, I'm noticing more like forms and energy events that are happening out in space.
That's fine, but all that is actuality. That is the actuality of radiance. But it's not actually forms. It's not actually happening out in space. Those interpretations are aspects of it, but are not it itself.
Right.
They're spin-offs of it. But just noticing that these events is noticing. Mm-hmm. Noticing what you're noticing when you're doing noticing is you're noticing experience. That's all. It's not mysterious.
Or noticing abstraction.
Well, abstraction occurs within experience.
Okay.
When I say experience, I mean your
Okay.
actual experience, your actual real-time experience.
Okay.
Being with the full field of your actual real-time experience, that's what noticing is. And of course you always are with the full field of your real-time experience. So.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I don't know. Sometimes I get exhausted noticing the events out there that are happening. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
you know, but it just, I mean, I feel like I'm kind of like, you know, I mean, that's what's happening, you know, a lot now. It's just noticing, you know, this thought, that thought, and everything that's kind of happening, and it's just, sometimes it's just too much effort to do that, but yet it keeps happening.
Yeah, like I would suggest be with the flow of events and notice how it's doing itself, and then there's no effort at all.
Yeah, okay, yeah.
It's not like you need to do it. I mean, or if you feel like you're doing it, just let go of doing it, and then see, and you'll notice right away that everything keeps happening. But you're not clinging to some kind of doership, which is tiring, and all of a sudden it gets very much easier, much lighter, without necessarily being a change of event. Because you don't need to, in noticing there's nothing to be done. Noticing is not something you need to, let me work up some noticing now, you know. It's not like that. Noticing is just letting go. Noticing is just, you just let go, and then everything happens on its own, because awareness shows up on its own, experience shows up on its own, all these patterns show up on their own, all these interpretations show up on their own. You know, getting sucked in or not shows up on its own. And since it's on its own, it's very easy. It's not demanding. It's not like there's nothing you need to maintain or sustain or support or put energy into. The energy does itself. Right. And that's what noticing, I mean, that's a good way to approach noticing, is notice the energy, the spontaneous energy that's doing everything that is not you, that's not personal. You don't have to churn out the flow of time. You don't have to churn out making the light shine. You don't have to churn out making gravity pull. It just does itself, and you can notice that. Notice it's doing it. Wow, I don't have to do that. And then look real hard and see if you can find anything you do have to do. And then try and do absolutely nothing, and lo and behold, you'll notice your experience is going on just like it was before, which is kind of a little revelation of like, wow. Maybe I've been busting my butt for no particular reason, because the butt busting happens on its own. I don't need to supply it. Why don't we have a little break, chai break? We'll be back shortly.
I didn't see something like that. Is that a cookie?
No,
It's
it's
something I brought him.
Private.
It's a gluten-free macaroon. He loves macaroons. It's chocolate macaroon.
So much for not noticing anything.
Oh, he's going to share with you, Irma. Oh, what a good boy.
You had such a... You just lit up so much.
I know. She was like, they're not, where are they?
You better touch his feet.
I'll bring more next time.
Well, I'm noticing I have quite a prejudice for form.
Uh-huh.
A formist.
You're a formist. Let's pray that you're not a conformist.
No, you're not. So that's good.
But that's a good thing to notice.
Yeah,
Because then you can notice the context within which it exists, and then you'll notice that the non-formal aspects of experience that are simultaneously present, that the bias exists within. And again, you don't even need to not be biased towards form, just notice the context.
I think the bias is towards doing.
Towards what?
Doing.
Well-
There's an implication that there's something to do.
Yeah, which is a subtle relationship to form, because you have to have forms or situations in order to need to do them.
But even a dream is more active than I was going to say than noticing, but then being aware of. But noticing is too active. I mean, it's beyond activity.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Well, it's beyond activity because it doesn't involve you.
It doesn't involve you, and it doesn't involve things. It doesn't
Right, it
involve
doesn't
events.
involve. Right.
There's apparent events, but it's not actually like
You're not
them.
involved in them, in a sense.
Well, it doesn't involve you in as much as there is no you.
Right.
And there's no it.
Right.
But
Yeah, but so
the awareness happens in what we call us, or
Right.
me, even though that's not what's...
That's a misinterpretation, though. too.
Right.
Well, of course it's a misinterpretation.
Well, just a finger.
You can't say any of this stuff.
Right.
But
No, but I mean, in the sense that the me is this.
yeah,
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's the point. It's just you don't need to stop having a me. You don't need to stop having a life. You don't need to stop having situations. You don't need to stop having doing. Just need to notice what all of that is in the context within which it all exists, and you discover that even as it exactly is those things, like it always has been, those things are much more than themselves. Those things are much more than what we hold them to be. And so you don't need to stop holding them to be that, because they are more than that. You know, it's like, I mean, you see these, you know, sort of heavy-handedly spiritual people who will wander around referring to themselves as this body or something, because they can't say the word I, because the word I is erroneous. You know, there's no self here. But that's silly, because what me refers to is intrinsically not a self, or is intrinsically, let's say, beyond any kind of a simple self. So me is what it always was. Me never was a self. So you don't need to somehow deny this usage of me or usage of self-orientation or relating to your life as if it's your life and you're doing it. because all of those things are perfectly true on that level, but they don't actually exist on that level. They exist on that level and vastly and inconceivably beyond that level. I didn't put that very well.
Which level?
Yeah, right.
7. Don't forget it.
Yeah. No, he's only 6. Right? Working on it. I have a question about what we were talking about earlier about functionality.
Uh-huh.
And you said something about, as we start maturing or noticing more, we start noticing meaning, or things become more, meaningful. Not all things, but I guess what we're noticing. But so my question is, sort of, why is it? I mean, my sense is that, before, if I was just getting all involved in or just seeing, patterns, or or getting stuck in a relationship, or any kind of situation, I was just sort of holding on to it. I was attached to it. Now it seems I'm not sort of holding on to anything or holding anything as so.
Uh-huh.
Just sort of, it just happens, more or less.
Uh-huh.
So is that? But so what's more meaning? So what I'm seeing is, what's really meaningful. This, and is that it? Is that what I mean?
Well, you discover the actuality of meaningfulness, which is not dependent upon a circumstantial interpretation of experience. Actual meaningfulness is very multidimensional and more sort of oceanic, you might say, rather than being situation specific and object specific and so on and so forth.
Yeah, as you said, it's always there. It's always been there. But so I was just getting. It's sort of like It's sort of like being stuck in flypaper or something. It's you just sort of moving like this instead of needlessly in a way. I mean, if you can just sort of get rid of the stickiness.
The stickiness, we actually supply the stickiness. It's not an actual stickiness, we're clinging, which makes this, but we don't notice we're doing the clinging, and so the things seem to be sticky because we seem to be stuck to them. We don't realize we're the ones who are doing the sticking by hanging on to them. And so if you let go, all that stick, then you just sort of a little more free-floaty, a little more fluid, and all that stickiness just sort of dissipates.
Yeah, I don't know if you read what Jeff sent out the night sky sangha or whatever it is. But
I always read Jeff's.
Yeah, but it was really good. I really liked what he said about if you're imagining a future, a thing of a future, what you're really doing is wanting. I like that idea of wanting. I mean, that was good. That seems to be been my whole life, just wanting.
Mm-hmm.
Who's this Jack?
And wanting blinds. Wanting blinds you to having, because having occurs in the present moment. Having is already the case.
Yeah.
And if you're with wanting, then you're cutting yourself off from actual getting of what you actually have. which is which is the finish line, which is where all the good stuff is. So
That's the only place anything is.
yeah. So you know, when you have that carrot out on a string out here, and that's what you're fixating on, you're cutting yourself off from what you have here now, which turns out to be the totality of reality and transcendence and divinity and everything else.
Yeah, that sort of seems to be sort of basic spirituality 101 or something.
Yeah.
Because there's another term, need. You know, I need this. You know, I need. You know, I need more. You know, there's not enough. I need more food. Or if you're that way, it's never enough. There's never enough. But I mean, if you're in that,
And you're still wanting though.
yeah, it's still wanting. Yeah.
How about noticing even the wanting and needing, that's something that's actual
Energy.
in the sense that I am getting is you know, that's actual energy.
Mhm.
And once
Yeah.
you have that contact, then it kind of spreads,
Yeah.
you know, into that oceanic.
Absolutely. Yeah. You know, again, I mean, that's the wonderful thing about noticing is it works in any context. You can be a total asshole and completely caught up in neuroses and clinging and misinterpreting and carried away in your storylines and just everything. And all of that actuality consists of this transcendental energy presence. And so right there is an avenue for noticing. Right there is, you know, the open doorway just ready for you to step into. You know, I mean, that's the wonderful thing about this is it has absolutely no prerequisites. You know, you can, you know, it's like everything is flammable, and so everything burns. So you don't need to go around looking for something to use as a starting point for noticing. Let me find the special noticing starting point. No, it's like, here I am. I'm pissed off. I'm neurotic. I hate my life. I this. I that. Okay, cool, great. Noticing starting point. It's like, dude, don't just jump on that. And bang, instant transcendence. You know, instant
Yeah,
energy.
I was going to say that somehow by noticing it transforms. Actually, what you've done is just transcended the.
When you note, you discover, and then you let yourself notice and appreciate the actual transcendence, which is always inherently present. You know, it's not even that you need to transcend or this. You know, it's like it's not even like that. It's already a done deal. You know, the work is already over. You know, the math has already been done. You're just like, oh, by the way, this is inconceivable transcendence already. Oh, cool.
That's easy.
Yeah.
Assembly not required.
Totally.
Yeah.
But if you are pissed off and hate your life and angry and all those things, it is a distraction.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And is is likely to be a preoccupation that will stop you noticing the present.
It may be, yeah. But it doesn't have to be.
Not necessarily.
It doesn't have to be, and nor does being joyful or even relaxed and blissful or anything else. But
That can be a
Yeah.
distraction
Anything,
too, though.
anything can be a vehicle for not noticing, just like anything can be a
Yes.
vehicle for noticing.
yeah,
So the good news is also the bad news, or is it the other way around?
it's all news.
But vice versa. Yes.
There is no such thing as not noticing.
Exactly, no such thing as not noticing. And noticing is appreciating that fact, paradoxically.
So is there a recommended way of meditating on this thing I think of as me as the focus of noticing? Does that make any sense?
Just whatever it is that is present, see what is present. So if there's me, what is, you must be referring to something by that notion. Look at what that something is. And when I say look, I mean however you're it's something. It's a perception or an experience or an intuition of some presence in your experience. And what is it that is present? What substance is present? What quality is it that is present as this me? And there's the vehicle for noticing. I mean, for me, the simplest technique of noticing is to go to the substance of an experience. Not that that's exclusive, because every aspect of any experience is radiance. But the substance of experience is typically its most neutral, objective portion, and typically its least story-laden portion.
Could you define what you mean by substance?
The actual textural presence of something that actually seems to be there. So if I'm talking about, a computer or a thought or a sound or an idea, there has to be, if there's a real object that I'm talking about, there has to be something present that I'm calling the idea. And the idea is some actual experiential presence. And so what is it that is present? How is it present? What's the texture of it? What's the feeling of it? What's the, and all this is of course euphemistic. But how is it presenting itself? What is there presenting as the substance, the substantial presence that I am designating as whatever it is I'm holding it to be?
Well, with something like this thing I think of as me, it's just identifying what the substance of that is pretty tricky.
Well, that can be interesting too. And if you can't find a substance, then it's just a word.
It's sort of like a tinge or something.
Well, if it's a tinge, though, you have a substantial presence. The tinge is some kind of quality, maybe very substantial.
There's a quality.
Maybe a very insubstantial, evanescent quality, but there's still some kind of qualitative presence. And qualitative presence is still substantial. It's still a substance.
Yeah.
An experiential substance. I mean, substance may be the wrong word if you think of substance in material terms.
Good use. In terms of the substances that are easiest to look at are big, obvious things like light shining on water and so forth. Compared to that, this sort of notion of me is a little trickier.
It is, but this reveals the subtlety of the radiance. Mm-hmm. Radiance exists subtly and multidimensionally and barely findably. Those are some of its major modes. It's arguably like an iceberg where 9/10 of it is very unfindable and slippery, and so the more obvious aspects of it is actually just its smallest portion. Experience, as of course we all know, experience exists on many, let's say, qualities of density and substantiality and definition. And vast portions of our experience are very subtle and very, what's the opposite of dense?
Subtle.
I'm thinking more in terms of, like, the scientists would say, ice is denser than air. So what air is... Anyway, there's a scale of density that goes from, heaviest material, a chunk of lead thrown in your face, versus, me and thought and nuance and subtle vibes and all these sorts of things. But all these are essentially the same substance, and this same radiance can appear in all of these ways, more or less, more heavily coherent and dense, and much, much less coherent and dense. And you go looking for thought and dreams and things like this, and all of a sudden you're looking at things that are much more subtle.
This is helpful, clarifying to think of it as essentially as an object, so
yes.
Look at and observe, as opposed to seeing it as the observing.
Yes, there is. This is a cardinal principle in practical terms. There's nothing subjective. Everything is an object. There's only objective presence. A subjectivity just screws us up, and it's non-existent. You can't find a subject. You can't find a perceiver. And you don't need a perceiver. perceiver is a logical argument. There's something perceived, so there must be something perceiving it. Like, says who? Maybe there's just something perceived. Maybe this stuff is appearing. And how's it appearing? Well, it doesn't make any sense, but it just is. Okay, who said it had to make sense? So once you throw out the perceiver and throw out subjectivity, then it's real easy, because then it's just all you have is just different degrees of objectivity, and what is it that is objectively present? And on that level, it's very, very simple. You just have this what I'm calling radiance that is present on an infinite degree of ranges of characteristics and ranges of density and ranges of subtlety and so on. And here it is, and it's just a self-evident. I mean, everything just falls into place. It's really obvious. Yeah, that's how it is.
What's what noticing is, anyways, and seeing that one thing is everything.
Yeah.
It's,
Yeah.
Boom. All
Yeah.
of them, yeah.
Absolutely. Again, it's like a dream. There's only one event present, the dreaming. And yet it can seem to be really confusing and complex and subtle and having all of these different differentiations and all this eventfulness and all. But there's only one very simple thing present, this dreaming, the actual event of dreaming. And all the apparent thingness that is present and implied in the dream is just by implication. There's nothing actually there other than just this principle of dreaming itself. And the same thing is true here, exactly. There's this one thing, which cannot be said, and I call it radiance, arbitrarily. But it is what it is, and it likewise constitutes all this, effortlessly.
I'm going to fool around with this approach of noticing the me idea or the me vibration or whatever bad words I choose to try to describe it.
Sure.
It's,
I mean, there's flavors, you get that radiance presents itself as all these flavors, and I would define meanness as a gestalt of flavors. I would define newness as a gestalt of flavors. I mean, I feel what your presence feels like, and then I feel what my presence feels like, and I can feel a difference. Your flavor, the gestalt, whatever, is the way it is, and mine is the way it is. And again, you go looking at, well, what is it? What is it that is present that I'm calling that? And it's fascinating. It's subtle. But it's not nothing. There is this amazing sort of a symphonic, holographic, fractal splash of qualitativeness, of flavors.
Yeah, but the me idea seems to be the last bastion of thingness. I can hang with the radiance of the chair, but the idea of the me is like, well, no, that's real. That's something.
But me is real. But me is just this. That this experiential field is present. Yeah. I mean, when you in the last analysis, that's what me refers to. And if you go looking, is there any other entity that is somehow seeing that or doing that or participating in that or watching that or something, you see that that's just an assertion. All the simple fact of the presence of what I call my experiential field is what me boils down to. Me is my experience, and my experience is this field. And then, okay, that begs the question, what is this field? And all of a sudden, bang, there you are with the transcendent again.
So let me just see if I'm confusing myself more. It feels like the apparition is just constantly swirling and changing, and that's pretty obvious. But it also feels like there's something that's steady state, that's always the same, that's maybe associated with the perceiving impulse.
Right.
Is that just? So I'm wondering, is this the last bastion of thingness? Or is this?
I think that you're still interpreting it a little heavy-handedly. We talked about this a little bit earlier. I don't know if you hadn't come in yet, although it wasn't in these terms so much. As that this always looks different, always presents itself as constant variability, but it never departs from itself. So it has a fundamental identity with itself, which transcends characteristics. So characteristics can come and go, but still its itness is always its itness, and it never varies or changes or becomes anything other than its itness. And I think this is something that we all intuitively perceive as our identity. Because there's a sense of, well, this is something that is something, and it is still something, and it's the same something it's always been. You know, like me, I'm me, and I've always been me, and I'm the same me that I was forever, and I'll be the same me in 5 minutes, and so on and so forth. But putting it in terms of a me and all of that is an unnecessary complication. It's rather just that this is itself, and it doesn't depart from that fact. That doesn't change, even as what it presents as anything, absolutely anything. Within its own internal logic of and here's where karma comes in, within its own internal movie. The movie tends not to depart from its plot line too far. You know, whatever that is and however open-ended that is. But again, that's more virtual than actual. So.
Well, if you talk about the dream, there's nothing there but the dreaming. Yet the dreamer feels more solid and real in the sense than the stuff in the dream looked at from the waking state.
Right. But you can't actually find a dreamer. Again, the dreamer is really more of an imputation or an intuition of the constancy of the identity of this. It just does not change. Even as the dream changes, the being of this is not changing. And I think that deep knowing that is self-evident is what we hinge our sense of me and sense of self on. But sense of me and sense of self and all that is, I think, a heavy-handed oversimplification of it. I think, like in Advaita and Ramana Maharshi and all that had it right. They call it the Atma, the self, but the self sort of the capital S self. So, and they would say everything is Atma. Atman is everything. Well, this is everything. Everything is this, and this does not depart from itself. Atman is always Atman, always has been, always will be. So, and that's referring to this same fact. And it is the actual self. It's not it is what you mean by your personal self, but it's not personal, even though it's unique to you, and you are the totality of it. Because again, that gets very, very strange and multidimensional when we try and look at how, you are your entire universe. Your entire universe is you, and there are no others. And that notwithstanding the fact that anyone else is their entire universe, and there is no others there, and there's no interrelationship between their universe and your universe. So the whole thing is very strange and makes absolutely no sense.
No, but I just see, as we were talking tonight, I've been seeing how I'm very used to the idea of questioning the solidity of what I'm observing, and very used to seeing more dimensions to the operation. I'm not in the habit of inquiring about this idea I have about me.
Yeah, play with it.
I'm me. Me.
Play with it, yeah. But again, try and go to the object, try to go to what is actually present, what you mean by that, what's experientially, try and get to what is objectively present that you're referring to as this meanness.
Well, that's helpful.
Rather than leaving it vague. Yeah, because you're concretizing it, it demystifies it, it takes it out of the realm of sort of assertion and ideas into some actual presence. If this meanness actually refers to anything, there must be something actually here that is what it is. And so all of a sudden you're looking for an object, you're looking for something that is, at least theoretically lookable for.
This has a bad case of split personality.
Well,
That's created the me.
We all have
other stuff.
We all have to deal with our inherent psychosis.
Or not.
Or not, yeah, preferably deny and duck it. I'll let you do it. No, you do it. No, you do it.
So the question arises, of course, what does the me or the Atman look like itself? And I would surmise that what you're saying is that every time we try to look at it and objectify it, it turns into the object we're looking for. And that's what it's doing, it's constantly turning into something. You say you want to know what I look like, here's something, and here's something, and here's something.
And yet it is present as the context within which all objectification, all specificity occurs.
But that presence would not be objective, or would it?
It's absolutely objective. The presence is objective, but it's unfindable as a specific.
As a specific, so the presence would be every possible version of it.
Well, no, the presence is the presence, and it generates any possible version of it, which is also the presence. The versions don't depart from the presence, but the presence is itself independent of the versions. But it's meaningless to talk about them as two things because they're one thing. I mean, that's why I use two words. I use radiant presence, because the presence refers to the fact that this doesn't depart from itself, and the radiance refers to the fact that it unendingly presents different qualities that are completely, infinitely variegated and unfindable and dynamic and morphing and so on and so forth.
So the reality can never be found as an object? I just asked that. And
the reality cannot be found as a specific object because but it can be known because it is self-evident.
In what dimension?
By its presence.
It's referring to this.
It is this presence. That this presence is undeniable and self-verifying. You don't need to argue it or look for it. You can't miss it. This is presence, right? And that this presence is the Atman. What does it look like? Well, it looks however it happens to look, and it looks like everything it has ever looked like. It looks like everything it will ever look like, but it is exactly this presence which doesn't wax or wane. There's never more or less present. It's always exactly present, even if it's nothing. Even if you're in deep sleep or general anesthesia or dead. Whatever qualitatively is going on is one thing, but the presence doesn't change. It's just.
I remember you saying very recently about that you should talk more about the radiance because the radiance is more interesting. The presence is just.
Well, the radiance you can actually look at. It's like in target shooting, the radiance presents itself as if it was a target, so you have something to shoot at. You can't shoot at presence because it's not it's too obvious, and it doesn't have the thingness. The thingness aspect of presence is radiance. So to be with presence, the easiest way to do it is be with the radiance. The radiance is the handle of the presence. If you want to grab presence, what you end up getting a hold of is the radiance, because that's what's a handle, that's what's a hook, that's what's presenting.
The presence is knowable.
Absolutely, it's obvious, it's undeniable.
Right.
But at the same time, it has zero qualities. The qualitative aspect of presence is the radiance.
There's a sense of it, though. There's a definite sense
Oh,
of it.
it's obvious.
So
It's
that's
undeniable.
quality.
Sure. But the sense of it is in this unending light show of the radiance. I mean, they're one and the same. So talking about them as if they're polarized to two aspects of the same thing is just confusing. But again, it doesn't make any sense. It's completely illogical. So
presence is knowable even when there's no qualities.
Absolutely, but no qualities is itself a quality.
Well, you could say that. Just like you can say radiance is presence and presence is radiance.
You messing with him?
I'm messing with him.
Well,
I know none of you will. maybe Alvia though.
Definitely.
I have maybe this can untangle the confusion I've had from way back about silencing.
25 lifetimes.
Well, yeah, several lifetimes. trying to silence the mind. I've in past years, I've worked hard to try to make the mind quiet. Rather more harsh than others.
How's that worked out?
No, I got it. And you and others, the scriptures that I can quote to also say that the mind is always jumping, even no matter whatever samadhi you may go into, even the mind is there. And yet I seem to have a silent mind.
Mm-hmm.
Now there's two things now that could be explain that. One is actually an experience. When I look closer, when after the question began to arise, I looked closer at what I was talking about as the silent mind, and I realized what I meant was there were no thoughts, but the thoughts had turned into a kind of flow.
Right. Yeah.
And that flow was silent in that there were no thoughts.
Right. Yeah.
But maybe also, or maybe as an alternative to that, in the same way that radiance can be distilled into presence, maybe I was just reaching a sense of presence and feeling that presence, as opposed to the fractal radiance coming off.
Right. Right. Well, I think it's a matter of sensitivity. I think that there's always radiance, but radiance exists on infinite gradation of subtleties. And sort of gross, heavy-handed radiance is thoughts racing a mile a minute. I mean, let's say I'm talking about in the field of mind. Let's say whatever arbitrarily designated. And if you shift your focus to, or somehow, or with the presence of mind, more and more subtly, the heavy-handed, gross aspects, i.e., thoughts, in a heavy-handed way, can diminish or stop. But there will always be some degree of radiance present, or let's say some subtlety of radiance present, because there's never a condition of non-radiance. It can't happen. And again, so you're talking about as a flow is, I would say, is exactly indicative of that. So you're being with the radiance, the inherent radiance in the field of mind on a finer level, on a less dense level. But it's not less radiant. It's just you're just being with it on another layer of another strata of density.
Well, that's what I came to. I came to understand it that way, and it's like you could feel this flow, just energy, just probably prana in the body, according to the yogis or something.
Yeah.
It could turn into thoughts.
Yeah,
like if
exactly.
I went for an answer, I would sort of go with the flow for a while, and then one seemed to be good, and it would turn into a thought. Maybe that would be the answer.
Yeah. It's like, sure. I mean, you can, exactly, flow is a good way to put it, or the flow of prana is a perfect model of that. It's like the ocean, the ocean is always, the water is always moving, and it may break out into explicit waves, or it may just be sort of currents in the deeps, but it's not, it's always the same event, whether or not it's explicitly showing up one way or another way. And the important point is it's not really important whether it's one way or the other way. The idea that a thoughtless state is somehow superior to a state with thoughts is erroneous. And maybe a useful exploration to play with different qualities of density of the radiance and so on, as an exploratory measure, but no quality of the radiance is superior or inferior to any other quality of the radiance. So less dense is not better or finer or more spiritual than more dense. And so from my point of view, I would say that the discovery of radiance itself is what matters, and then once you see radiance in its own perspective, it becomes apparent that the qualities of how it's presenting are irrelevant, and so you're not losing anything when you're having a very dense, heavy-handed presentation. You're not gaining anything when you're having a very subtle, refined, nuanced presentation, because it's all actually always infinite dimensional. In other words, even when it's being gross, it's also infinitely subtle. Even when it's being subtle, it's also infinitely gross, and it's more of an emphasis of focus than the actuality. I mean, this is what I try and indicate with this word transcendence, is that any presentation of radiance includes all of it. So, a course presentation includes every level of fineness and subtlety and multidimensionality and infinity and divinity, and vice versa. So it is beyond any version of itself, even as it presents itself in all these various versions experientially. And yet each of those versions is just a presentation of this vast, inconceivable, infinite, transcendent reality.
So when you talk about things turning into other things, as you look at them, they turn into one thing after another. They're not stable. Can that mean, like, I'm looking at the table and I can see it, say it sparkles, as we were saying before. I can see this form, and I can see if there's an idea I have about a table, maybe a concept. In other words, it can jump they can jump dimensions.
Absolutely.
So that is all part of this conglomerate of things called table.
Yeah, and so much more, that we aren't even designating, or is not even designatable. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, everything comes with, and it's all non-linearly connected, cross-connected with itself in ways. I mean, that's the way the inherent intelligence works, with this astounding, non-linear interrelationship.
It does seem that there is an edge to this radiance, even though I know there is no edge. There is a sense of fullness or completeness that gives this sense of tangible kind of graspability or
Yeah, it is full, it is complete, but you can't find an edge. And there may even seem to be an edge, but if you go looking for those edges, you'll notice they're a lot like the edges in those M.C. Escher etchings, where it actually sort of gets finer and finer and finer and finer and finer. And if you kept following the levels of fineness, it'd be the turtles all the way down kind of thing, where you would never actually get to a point where there was an actual edge.
right.
So again, edges exist more by implication than by actuality, because when you're looking for them, you can't find them.
Right.
But there's definitely it's definitely complete. And again, that's the presence. That's the fact that this never departs from itself. This contains itself completely, wholly, effortlessly, and with absolute finality.
And knowableness might be more of a rather than edge.
Yeah, this is definitely knowable. And it's knowable in direct proportion to your ability to let go of it as being this or that. The more you can let go of expectations of what it is, the more profoundly you can know what it is. Because again, the only impediment to being with this as it is our ideas of what we think it is, which are all wrong, always inherently. You cannot have an accurate idea of what this is. And so, to the extent you relate to this through ideas of what it is exactly the extent to which you will be stymied in being with it as it is. So the more you can just be with it, just open-endedly, the more you can, the more profoundly and obviously, explicitly, you can know it.
I saw that movie, that So Chan movie. One of the things I liked about it was the sun who was working, in some corporation, who said that he had to give up his job because the visions and experiences that he was having just became so intense that he could no longer hold down his day job. So I was sort of looking forward to that.
I want a piece of that action. Man,
Qualify some sort of
I'll have what he's having. Make mine a double.
That's a definite handicap, right? It's called.
I should get a doctor's letter for that.
So when you're talking about this kind of knowledge and this knowing, it seems like it's the opposite of what we typically think of as knowing. You
Yes.
know a fact, and you know your times tables, you possess that knowledge, and it's locked down.
Yes.
And this kind of knowing you're talking about is the opposite of that. It's more like the more you know, the less you know.
Yes. Human ideas of knowing are completely erroneous, of course, as all human ideas are. Actual knowing is synonymous with experience and is also synonymous with being. To know is to experience, and to experience is to be.
Well, you could use gravity as a sort of a metaphor. I don't know if the metaphor is the right word for it, but you know gravity without having to know anything about it, and you don't even have to think about it.
You know it because you experience it, and the fact that you experience it means you are it, because you are your experience.
Right,
and that is the knowing. That is the totality of knowing, and abstract knowing is just a pale shadow of that knowing.
And that applies to the me thing that he was talking about earlier.
Absolutely.
So it's like.
Well, I come from a new generation. What are you laughing? So do you, Lily.
I know, right?
It's the real thing.
How about looking at experience as sort of a claiming and a extending, like a constant full. Does that? What am I saying? Well, experience, sometimes I think of it as a little bit lofty, and then there's other things. So if I'm looking at experience as something that is itself, in that it's self-evident, that it knows itself, then it's kind of claiming. It's just knowing, right? I mean, it's just knowing more and more of itself.
Yeah, it endlessly knows itself in an ever-deepening way. I mean, that's what experience is.
Yeah.
Experience is an ever-unfolding, never ceasing deepening of knowing itself.
Exemplified right here.
You should see it from the inside.
Well, you could take the texture of the feeling, of the sense of feeling, like the feeling of I.
Mm-hmm.
The I, the me, has a feeling tone to it, which we interpret as me, as a person,
Sure.
as a self, that could also just be this flow of radiance.
Of course.
So,
And that's what I was indicating to Greg, is if you go looking for what is actually experientially present that you refer to by me, you ultimately find this flow of radiance and nothing else. And you get that, this flow of radiance is me. And that's the truth. It's as much you as there ever was. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Everything.
Of course, this flow of radiance is this flow of radiance.
Flow is quite a nice way of describing it.
It is. It, it can be misleading if you get too micromanaging with it, but it is evocative.
Yeah.
It is evocative,
It doesn't have any time constraints.
and it doesn't actually move from anywhere to anywhere else, which flow implies. But still, in all, it is evocative. Flow. The notion of flow indicates its absolute. The absolute instability of all stasis, of all apparent, any version is actually, a dynamism.
It also brings to me like a law of the universe, gravity or something.
Yeah.
That it's inevitable and
Yeah.
it's not something that you do, it just happens.
Yeah. I mean, to me that's implicit in the word radiance, or the notion radiance, because radiance is an unending shining forth, which is exactly synonymous to this flow. And it's directly experienced. This is not an abstraction. This is a very concrete, the very essence of what experience is.
On the other hand, when my kids ask me, how long till we get there? And I say, we're already there. They're not convinced.
Are we there yet? We're already there. It's a new take on
We're
the
already
old classic, isn't it?
No, we're already here.
This isn't the there they're wanting.
There's no there, there's only here, boys.
It's only here.
They're there.
This is going to be an interesting.
5 minutes from now, we'll still be here. Oh yeah, I want to be a fly on the wall in this
There's
trip.
no from now, there's just now.
That's right. Yeah, they got me there.
Lily, you don't want to be on this trip.
It's better than.
No, definitely not.
What I would do-
Doesn't want to be
What I
on
would do
this
is
trip.
put it back
And
in
she's
air
figuring
laps
something
and make
else.
a pool. Say, when do you think we're going to get there?
Oh, yeah.
Let's see who
Oh,
wins.
there you
Let's see who
go.
wins, and then you got to trump up some
Play that game you
prize
play.
of $1 or cotton candy or whatever to the winner of
Right.
like whoever gets closest to the time you arrive. And then then all of a sudden it's their competition and their investment rather than you being the foreground.
And then you can decide who wins by going faster or slower.
Yeah, right.
I was thinking that
You get
too.
there, you can ask them.
No, but they're going to start saying, "Go faster, Dad! Go faster! Go slower! Go slower!" There's no way to win this one. Forget it.
It's all good, man.
We're good.
Bring along a couple of joints and pass them around.
Yeah, drugs is always a good solution.
All questions will stop very shortly.
Guys, they're definitely from a different generation, those two. Sex, drugs, and rock and roll.
Peace, man.
Yeah. It's the flower generation.
It's nice too because that comes
Flower
up
power.
later on the screen, Peter. You get that twice.
Works for me.
Yeah. Amen.
Peace and love, man.
Countdown. One hell of a salsa.
Good salsa.
One hell of a salsa.
We're getting good at this.
Some drug in the child.
How are the guys on the internet on the cyber?
Good night, all.